This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, Rabbi. Shabbos Nachamu. Nachamu, Ami, Yoimar Elokeichem. The Ribbon Shalom says, console my people. Says the Ribbon Shalom. Well, what's the Nachamu? What's the consolation? He says, Nachamu, but what is the Nachamu? What's the consolation? Imagine you go into a Shiva house and you cry out, console! They look at you, what are you talking about, console? What? No, you have something to say? Say it. But what's the consolation? What is the Nachamu of Shabbos Nachamu? What is the consolation? Gemara tells us in Masechta Tainis and Daf Lamed Amud Beis, Kol hamisabel al Yushalayim, anyone who mourns over Yushalayim, Zoiche beroya biyeshuasa. He merits and he sees the salvation of Yerushalayim. Now look very carefully at the words. It doesn't say Zoiche v'yeroya or v'yira b'yeshuasa. It doesn't say he merits that he will see the salvation of Yerushalayim. It says Zoiche, he merits v'roya, he sees right now the salvation of Yerushalayim. What's that supposed to mean? If a person mourns for Yerushalayim, then immediately he sees the Mashiach? It should say Zoiche v'yira b'yeshuasa. He will see. Why v'roya? This is the question of the Chassam Sofer. The story goes that when Napoleon reached Jerusalem in his attempt for world conquest, so he happened to come to the place where the Beis HaMikdash stood on the day of Tisha B'Av, and he sees around the Makam HaMikdash there were Yidden sitting on the floor, wailing, crying, mourning, and Napoleon goes over to them. He says, "What are you doing on the floor? Why are you crying? You're grown men. You're not babies. What are you crying about?" So they responded, "We're mourning over the destruction of our temple." Napoleon said, "Your temple? I am very well versed in world history. When did your temple stand? I don't remember a temple here." So they said, "It stood 1700 years ago." He said, 1700 years ago? And you're still crying? People stop crying over a dear relative after a year, 2 years, 3 years. Nobody cries more than a month over a building, and you're crying 1700 years about a Beis HaMikdash that even your great-great-great-great-grandfather never saw? He said like this, if you're still crying, if you're still in pain, that means your temple is not destroyed. It's still here. Says the Chassam Sofer, in the Drashos Chassam Sofer, Chela Gimel, page Pei Daled. How is it that no nation is able to cry for any of their past tragedies? Take the Romans. The Romans have a day on the calendar when they get down on the floor and they cry about the glory lost of the Roman Empire. You go to Persia. Do the Persians have a day of mourning to mourn the glory and the power of the Persian Empire that was lost? Of course not. It's ancient history. No one even cares. How is it that the Jewish people are the only nation in the world that are still able to mourn for their former glory? Says the Chassam Sofer. This is in the Drush of Chassam Sofer. He says, when Yaakov Avinu was told that Yosef HaTzadik was torn up, Taraf Yosef, the brothers tried to console Yaakov. Vayemoim lehisnachem, he refused to be consoled. Why did he refuse to be consoled? Because people are only consoled for someone who died. But Yosef was alive. You see, Hashem did a very big chesed with mankind. And that is, if somebody would lose a relative, if they would always be in pain, always be b'tzar, they wouldn't be able to live. So Hashem did a chesed that after 12 months, a person forgets about the pain of their relative. Hashem makes a person forget about the mace. There's a gezeira, there's a decree that a human being forgets about a mace. Not completely, but the pain, the raw pain is forgotten. It fades with time. But when someone is alive, if the relative's alive, God never decreed that you'll forget about it. Says the Chassam Sofer, if after 2,000 years we're still crying over the Beis HaMikdash, that means the Beis HaMikdash isn't dead. The Beis HaMikdash must be alive. And it's alive in Shamayim. It's built in Shamayim. It's completely intact in Shamayim. And all we need to do, says Rashi and Tosfos in Masechta Sukkah, Daf Mem Aleph, all we need to do is be Zaycha for it to come down and for us to see it. But the fact that we're able to cry over the Beis HaMikdash means the Beis HaMikdash is not a mace. It's not dead. If it was dead, we couldn't cry. the fact that we still have tsar, the fact that it still bothers us means the Beis HaMikdash is alive. Says Chassam Sofer, now we understand a most perplexing concept. We know that on Tisha B'Av, we don't say Tachnan. You don't put your head down. Ein nofsel ma'pneim b'Tisha B'Av. It's halacha and Simin Taf Kuf Nun Tas. Why? Because Tisha B'Av is a moyed. Like the pasuk says, Kara alai moyed. Tisha B'Av is a Yom Tov. You don't even say Tachnun on Erev Tisha B'Av. Even the Beis Yosef writes that if there's a Levaya on Tisha B'Av, they would limit the ceremony because it's a Yom Tov. A Yom Tov? What's the Yom Tov of Tisha B'Av? What are you celebrating? Says Chassam Sofer. You know what you're celebrating on Tisha B'Av? You're celebrating the fact that you're able to cry. If you could mourn and cry and it bothers you terribly that there's no Beis HaMikdash, that means the Beis HaMikdash isn't dead. That means the Beis HaMikdash is alive in Shemayim. So the fact that you have a Tisha B'Av, that is a Yom Tov. Because of the Beis HaMikdash, if we didn't have a Tisha B'Av, and if we couldn't cry anymore, then that would be a terrible reason to cry. If you couldn't cry, and the Beis HaMikdash was dead and long lost, and we can never get it back, that would be the biggest tragedy. The fact that the Romans don't have a Tisha B'Av for their former glory, that means they're never going to get it back. The fact that the Persians never cry about their empire, that means it's long lost. But if Hashem gave us a chesed, that He allows us to cry for the Beis HaMikdash, that's because the Beis HaMikdash is alive. The Beis HaMikdash is a chai. And if it's a chai and we're able to cry, that's the greatest simcha. Because if we're able to cry, that means we'll be able to laugh and we'll be able to celebrate with the Beis HaMikdash. And perhaps that is the Nachamu of Shabbos Nachamu. The consolation of Shabbos Nachamu is Tisha B'Av itself. The fact that we have a Tisha B'Av and we're able to cry and we're able to mourn and we're able to remember means we're going to get it back one day. The greatest Nachama all Hashem has to say is Nachamu, Nachamu. Console, console. You know what the consolation is? The fact that we have a Tisha B'Av, that itself is a Nechama. That means we're going to get it back. That means the Beis HaMikdash is alive. That is the greatest source of consolation. The Roikeach tells us, also in the Sefer Paneach Raza, that the gematria of Nachamu, Nachamu is 208. Nachamu is 104. Plus Nachamu, another one for 208. 208 is the gematria of Pinchas, Eliyahu Hanavi. We should be Zoicha. Eliyahu Hanavi should usher in the Geula and tell us the words we've been waiting for. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.